I wanted to ask you that you mentioned in several interviews that you grew up in a tough neighborhood of Miami.
Exactly.
So, and I was wondering if those artistic activities as a kid, if it was something that you did after school, if that's something you did also to stay out of trouble in that tough neighborhood, and if so, what were those first artistic things you did as a kid?
Well, the big deal was first my initial experience with art and that sort of drawing and sketching and stuff I got from my father. My father never finished eighth grade. He had polio when he was a kid, and his father left him and his mother and his brother and sister, and so he felt he would, since he was the oldest, he had to go out and work to help support the family. So he took his braces off his legs and threw them in the trash and hid the fact that he had polio because he knew people wouldn't hire him otherwise. And he went out and he started working hard when he was about 14, 15 years old.
Mhm.
By the time he was 20, he was a smoking alcoholic, put it bluntly.
Wow.
And so I grew up with this alcoholic. Well, because he had polio, one leg was shorter than the other by about 2 inches.
Mhm.
So he walked around on that foot on the pad of the front, the ball of the foot.
Mhm.
And he worked in a warehouse on concrete floors his whole life, maybe 40 years. And he developed a callus that went all the way to the bone in his right foot.
Oof.
So I realized when I got a little older that the reason he drank so much, mostly beer, had to do with the fact he was in excruciating pain
Right.
and poor. And so he couldn't go to the hospital or see a doctor to get it fixed. So he just lived with it and drank himself to sleep every night. When I was very, very young, my father was a great artist, even though he
Mhm.
never got finished with his school. When I was about three, he would always put me in my high chair
Mhm.
and it had a tray in the front. And he'd take a toy and he would take like a little toy airplane or car or whatever, and he put it on a shelf and he put the paper in front of me and he'd sketch it with a pencil.
Oh,
Okay. And then he put a
that's a
fresh piece of paper in
good tip.
and hand me a crayon and he'd
Mhm.
point to the toy and walk out of the room. And I would try to draw the toy.
Wow.
Now, obviously, I was not real good when I started,
Well, yeah, right, right.
but I was encouraged so much by him. And he knew that I had that skill and he wanted me to keep polishing it. And
Mhm.
so I did. Everywhere I went, I'd find some reason to sketch it or make some kind of an artistic event. Um, but I do it because it's a great way to relax. Uh,
Right.
because my mind is just working on that.